City News Community Calendar.
We've seen a lot of headlines over the last number of years highlighting university students and professors being criticized for voicing opinions that stray from what people are considering politically correct. Now, does something really need to change in our education system? Joining me from Steinbach, Manitoba is Michael Zwaagstra. Michael is a high school teacher and a senior fellow with the Frontier Center for Public Policy, specializing in education research. Welcome to Bridge City News, Michael.
Well, thank you for having me.
Now, you wrote an article entitled "Brainwashed Students Aren't Critical Thinkers." Can you first of all define what you mean by brainwashing?
Well, brainwashing I would describe as teaching someone what to think. So you're coming at something from a particular perspective and you are doing everything you can to make sure that they come to the conclusion that matches with your own. And so that is, in a simple form, that's brainwashing.
So what do you mean by critical thinking and how this needs to be tied in with something you call content knowledge?
Well, critical thinking is the ability to discern between different perspectives. And so you're able to read something and you're able to analyze it and you're able to look at different perspectives. And so you're not simply understanding only one side of the equation, you understand both sides or multiple sides. Now, the reason that content knowledge is very important is because we need to make sure that students know a lot of things. You need to have a lot of facts in your brain. Students who don't know anything aren't critical thinkers. You cannot think critically about something you know nothing about. And so you look at some of the debate that's happened recently about should schools be named after Johnny McDonald or not. This has been debated a lot in the last number of months. Well, you can only offer an intelligent, critical thought on this if you actually know some things about Johnny McDonald, if you know about what he did as prime minister, if you know a bit about the cultural context at the time, and if you know about some of the issues and some of the good things and the bad things that he did. Those are all pieces of information, facts that you need to have in your brain in order to think critically about that question.
Now, can you share with our viewers the example of the Regina Public School teacher who had his grade 6 and 7 students spend most of November working on climate change projects?
Well, this was a situation that was reported pretty extensively in another media outlet, and it was a teacher who had gone to an Al Gore training institute. And Al Gore, of course, is well known for his activism on the issue of climate change. And the institute that he puts on is designed to turn people into what are called climate reality leaders, people who take action in regards to climate change. And so what happened was that this teacher went to this institute and then spent nearly an entire month with his students doing climate change projects. And so all the students were expected to give presentations about to the public about how we can deal with climate change. And my concern with that is that it's all well and good to learn about climate change and learn meteorology and the different things that affect climate and the difference between climate and weather. But it's concerning when you have a teacher assuming that every single student in the class is going to come to the same philosophical belief about the issue and then be equally passionate about presenting an action project regarding it. It would be far better for the students to learn a lot about climate and weather and the different perspectives on climate change. And then if they choose to take action with their new knowledge, that would be great, but not something that should be expected of an entire class.
So we're seeing teachers present only one side of the argument, their personal opinion as fact, which really does not prepare students for the real world. What about presenting differing viewpoints?
You should always present different viewpoints. And, the maxim that I have with my students is that I'm not interested in trying to make them agree with me. I'm interested in them learning how to think critically. And so I will always make an effort to present a variety of perspectives and introduce different sources and get them to think through issues, because that's what true learning is. And if we want students to be active and to change the world, they need to be knowledgeable and they need to know a lot of things. If we just simply have the teacher present one side and then the students follow that perspective, well, they're doing it basically because that's what their teacher believes. We want students to be passionate about things because they're actually knowledgeable and they understand the different sides.
Yeah, be well educated before you create your own and form your own opinion. Absolutely. Now, here in Alberta, the government is currently rewriting its K-12 social studies curriculum, and apparently there is a lack of emphasis on specific historical facts and events. Instead, students will focus on broad themes such as diversity and environmental stewardship. Do you see any issues with that?
I see significant issues with that because a social studies curriculum should have a solid foundation. And so in a subject like history, there should be a requirement that students learn a whole lot of dates. They should learn a lot of key individuals, a lot of key events. They should know how these things work in sequence. You have to have that background knowledge in order to think critically about history and how it impacts us today. if you're going to approach it instead with this thematic approach, which it already does to a large degree, my concern is that they're moving even further in this direction. If you're focusing on diversity the whole time and focusing on environmental stewardship, and you're not doing it in the context of first providing the facts and knowledge and content base, then what you have there is an invitation to brainwash, because instead of providing the background knowledge, instead students are again doing these action projects, and they're coming at it from one perspective. And so I think that any social studies curriculum needs to have a very solid content emphasis. And I should add as well, one of the reasons that a content emphasis is so important is that content knowledge, background knowledge, is important to reading comprehension. The evidence is very clear on this, that if you don't have background knowledge about what you're reading, you're not able to understand it. You may be able to decode the words, but you won't be able to understand what you read. So the more you know, the more you're able to read. The more you're able to read, the more you'll be able to know. And so, but if you don't get that background knowledge, that base, then you will fall further and further behind.
Now, Michael, my understanding is that many provinces are now doing this with each subject in the curriculum. Now, what do these issues really have to do with mathematics, and how will it help students get better at math?
Well, and this is the thing too, is that in math, it's extremely important that you have a factual knowledge base. And so students need to learn basic addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. They need to learn the standard algorithms, the standard ways of in adding and subtracting, you put one number on top of the other, and then you go digit by digit, because that's what works with numbers of any size. And the problem is that with the discovery math approach, you don't have that level of emphasis. Students need to know their times tables. If you don't know your times tables by memory, you will struggle with upper level math. You will not be able to solve algebraic equations if you're constantly having to look up that 6 times 6 is 36. You need to have the basics mastered, and unfortunately, there's not enough of an emphasis on this in provincial curricula.
You know, it's funny you should bring up the times tables. I remember learning all my times tables, you know, the addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. But let's get back to discovery math, a method of teaching that's become a little controversial and some say quite ineffective, Michael.
Well, it's very ineffective because it's an approach that emphasizes that students create their own knowledge and their own understanding. And so it discourages direct instruction, where the teacher's in front of the room and is showing step by step how to solve problems and go over things, which is just simply good teaching. That's what direct instruction is. But with the discovery approach, the emphasis is on students creating their own ways of solving problems. And so that's why if you pick up a math textbook series like Math Makes Sense and you read through it, you'll find that math doesn't make sense when you read through that textbook, because the examples are complicated, they're convoluted, and students are largely being encouraged to develop their own algorithms. And that's very frustrating, and it makes it very hard for students to actually master math.
And for the teachers as well. I mean, let's keep it as black and white as possible, you know. 2 plus 2, yes, is 4, right? Now, how do today's math students compare with students, let's say, from 20 or 30 years ago?
Well, we're seeing we're seeing some significant weaknesses. There's a recent group that was formed a few years ago called Wise Math, that was formed by a number of math professors at universities in Western Canada. And they have certainly been very clear about pointing out that they see the difference in first-year math students at university, that they don't know the fundamentals. You compare math exams now versus 20 or 30 years ago, you see significant, much weaker now in terms of what students are expected to do. So we have seen a decline over that period of time.
You know what's really sad too, I know with my own kids, I mean, they're older now, my son's a college graduate, my daughter's just graduating high school, but for many times, you know, I'd ask them simple mathematication, they pull out a calculator. They just pull out a calculator. I'm like, really? You guys need a calculator? And I guess they were allowed to use that in school as well.
Well, and you shouldn't have to use a calculator for basic math. There's a basic concept in psychology. It's called cognitive load, and that it's talking about there's only so much room in your working memory. Your working memory can only handle so many things at a time, and so that's why it's so hard to memorize someone's phone number for the first time, because you have to consciously make the effort to remember all 7 digits. Once you've got it in your long-term memory, well, you've got it. That's why no one ever forgets their own phone number if they use it regularly. But the problem is that when you don't have things memorized in school, so for example in math, if the cognitive load is too high, if you don't have the basic facts memorized, you're always looking them up, your brain isn't able to properly handle the more advanced questions. And so again, with an algebra question, if you have to struggle with basic addition and basic multiplication, you're not going to be able to think about the more complicated algebraic equation that you're dealing with.
Now, Michael, some say we need standardized provincial achievement tests. Others say, don't worry about it. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think we need them. If we want to know how students are doing, we need these standardized achievement tests. It shouldn't be the only thing that we do, but we certainly should be keeping track of where students are at. You know, what percentage of students are passing, and what are areas of strength and weakness, which schools are doing well, and what are some schools we can learn from, and which schools are struggling, and then we can look into why are they struggling. If you don't do those achievement tests, you're operating in the dark and you're just taking a guess. So we do need those tests.
So where do you see our education system 10 or 20 years from now? Will we have more young people who are able to finally think for themselves, or more indoctrinated young adults who only repeat what they're told to repeat?
Well, if we continue in the trend that we are now, we're going to see fewer critical thinkers. We're going to see students that lack the background knowledge that they need in order to read effectively, and so they'll read less. They'll be more likely to, if they hold views, they may just go with what they were taught by their teacher in school. And that's unfortunate. I'm hoping the pendulum often swings in education. I'm certainly hoping it swings back to a proper emphasis on content knowledge and students learning facts and skills and actually being able to work from there.
So what are you hearing from the parents, Michael? Are you getting together with them saying these kids need to be more critical thinkers? Do you get together with parents groups or other teachers, maybe the school board there? What are your thoughts?
Well, lots of parents have concerns, and parents want their kids to do well in school. And when you boil it right down, what do most parents want schools to do? They want their kids to learn how to read. They want them to be able to do math. They want them to be able to think critically. Those are some basic things that all parents want. And so certainly that's something that I hear. And yeah, in a subject like math, this is an area that is very frustrating, because most parents don't want to have to spend long periods of time working with kids on math questions that don't make sense because they're following this discovery approach.
And it's hard because, I mean, we learned a certain way, our children are learning a different way, so how can we really help them? It makes it more challenging, doesn't it?
Well, it does, because and I've heard like this happens where you have parents who are accountants, parents who are engineers, math professors, when they can't figure out the grade 3 math problem that their kids are bringing home, it's probably not a good question. It's probably a lousy assignment. If you're an engineer and you don't understand your kid's grade 3 math assignment, you're not the problem. The problem is the assignment and the textbook that's based on a faulty approach.
So what can we do as parents? Can we be proactive, maybe reaching out to MLAs, MPs? I mean, what's our school board trustees? What do we have to do?
Well, there's several fronts. Obviously, always talk to the teachers and principals at the local school level, because not all teachers are the same. Not all schools are the same. And so in many cases, you'll find that teachers are actually quite receptive to these concerns and appreciate hearing these things from parents, because it gives them more fortitude in terms of sticking with some of these fundamentals. Parents should talk to trustees and vote in elections, because this is something that school boards can have some influence over in terms of setting direction. And because education is a provincial responsibility, ultimately you would also need to lobby MLAs because the provincial government sets the curriculum and sets the direction.
So start with your teacher and work your way up from there. Michael Zwaagstra, Senior Fellow at the Frontier Center for Public Policy. Thanks a lot for joining me today.
Well, thank you for having me.